Today's episode comes halfway through Season 5, which is notable because it very much looks and feels like a much earlier episode. We kick off with the revelation that the Enterprise is following a stellar core fragment through the Moab sector, where they make a discovery. Seems someone is living here. An unknown human colony is located on Moab 4, and they have a comm array, which means that we can talk to them, which is good because they might want to know about this galactic kidney stone coming their way. So the Enterprise calls up, but the locals tighten their defenses around their habitat. They have a biodome on a hostile planet, see, so shooting them hurts in more ways than the usual. They finally answer.
We were unaware that there were human colonies in this system.
I don't want to be rude, Captain.
But we hate bald people. They don't like dealing with outsiders and are just calling up to say they know about the fragment, but they're prepared. Their dome can handle quakes up to 8.7 on the Richter scale. But Data says they're in for something even worse than that, when we're talking a Charlton Heston kind of earthquake here. They're not familiar with transporter technology, so Picard explains that we can bring their leader up or send a delegation down, whichever you prefer. But Ron Canada is on hand to protest this whole development. There always has to be one contrarian, doesn't there? But not to worry, though. This is his job. The permanent loyal opposition. You see, Connor explains, their ancestors came 2 centuries ago to create an engineered society using selective breeding in order to create a utopia.
We have immeasurably extended the potential of humanity. Physically, psychologically, we have evolved beyond
us.
Frankly, yes.
Not in the area of modesty, certainly.
No one in this society would be blind, for example. No offense intended.
No offense, but thank God I'm not cursed to be an inferior specimen like you. Connor, while concerned because the society is so carefully balanced that even the environment itself has been carefully adjusted, nevertheless knows that the colony is in mortal peril and demands a certain amount of flexibility. Not going to do them much good if they maintain dogmatic purity right up until the dome cracks and poison gas fills their perfect world. But the crew is a little put off learning that everybody has been created with a specific intention for them and a desire to do it.
My entire psychological makeup tells me that I was born to lead. I am exactly what I would choose to be. Think of it another way. Are there still people in your society who have not yet discovered who they really are or what they were meant to do with their lives? They may be in the wrong job. They may be writing bad poetry. Or worse yet, they may be great poets working as laborers, never to be discovered. That does not happen here.
It was at this point I was disappointed to realize this episode was not going to be the excitement I thought. Turns out this wasn't called the Master Chief Society. -1 point for this already. Assessing the concept of the Moab colonists is difficult because, in the end, it comes down to the question of what the purpose of society is. I tried to see if there was some kind of universally agreed view upon that, but after 3 screeds that clearly started with the assumption of my political views are correct and indisputable, then worked backwards to define the purpose of society, I accepted that if there is an objective agreed set of criteria, it's been drowned under a sea of self-satisfied jizz. So with nothing else to help me, I've meditated on it a bit myself, but please take all this with a grain of salt. I am, after all, focused mostly on science, technology, and have a degree in general education. Frankly, I'm not much of a judge of social aspects. I don't even like going outside. Anyway, though, I think that society can probably best be considered to be a balancing act between opposing forces upon 3 axes. The first are the needs of the group and the needs of the individual, and this can also include the idea then of order versus dissent as well. The second axis is the need for continuity and the need for evolution. And third is the need for stability and the need to overcome challenges. A society has a sliding scale view on where the balance is between those 2 opposing forces, which I think is what shapes all of the different societies that we have. Now, the Moab society has slid the second and third ones firmly in the direction of continuity and stability rather than upon evolution and overcoming challenges. hence the reason that this society is stagnant. Ron Canada's character exists to argue the retention of their society's original values in case arguments are ever advanced to oppose them, but there is no counterpart that advances the idea of change. The group versus individual is complicated by a compromise that essentially creates a world where your position is dictated, but you've been programmed to want that position. A view that is achieved by genetic predisposition, although I'm sure that social forces exist as well to reinforce the idea. I'm reminded of the comic Judgment Day, about the society of robots whose arbitrary designation is first instilled by a machine that essentially reflects this. Now, it's all well and good to say I am what I would choose to be, but the problem is not everybody gets to be a leader, scientist, or poet. The world needs people to maintain systems as a filthy job. The world needs people to provide services that are not exciting. Is programming someone to clean up the colony's sewerage or be a server in a restaurant a good thing or a bad thing? Is it really utopia if we have bred ditch diggers to love digging ditches? I don't bring this up to say that this is a society which must be overthrown, but rather because there is discussion in the episode about the merits of it. I think it can be argued that this is probably about a 7 or an 8 on the Brave New World scale. Well, to deal with the problem, the away team meets with Hannah, the foremost theoretical physicist in this society, and she'll be working alongside Geordi. She cooks up the idea for a multiphasic tractor beam to shove the stellar fragment out of the way, something that their society couldn't use because they lacked the reactor power for such a device, but the Enterprise's warp reactor could do the job. Hannah has to work on it on the Enterprise, though, something Ron Canada disapproves of. But Connor allows it since the alternatives are abandoning the colony or everyone dies. And some are fine with the latter.
They've managed to turn a dubious scientific endeavor into dogma.
Remember this lamentation for later. Meanwhile, the project isn't going so well with Geordi and Hannah, and the subject of Geordi's congenital blindness comes up, about how he wouldn't be allowed to exist in their society, thus making it all the more ironic that it's the technology of his visor that provides the solution to the problem. Heh, suck it, eugenics. What we're also seeing below, as Connor and Troy witness the first tremor caused by the strain of the stellar fragment, is that the society is ill-conceived because it lacks flexibility. It can't handle too much strain or it will break. So re-engineering their society from the ground up on another planet is just impossible. Again, an important point for later on. So if their society is screwed, hey, why not go the whole 9 yards and bump uglies with Troy? Troy regrets this for the reason that I got into last week with Unforgettable on Voyager. This can't go anywhere. Their perfectly balanced society does not have room for someone who is half Betazoid hopping into the gene pool with them. It'd be like trying to put a buffalo in a canoe. We're going to rock the boat a wee bit. Speaking of rocking the boat, Hannah arrives with Geordi to explain the plan. We can move the fragments some, but not enough. So we need to reinforce the biodome to save the colony. Now we can do it, but engineers from the Enterprise will need to come down and work with the locals to get everything installed in time. Connor approves since there's no other way, and lucky thing, the Enterprise is barely able to nudge the fragment without breaking the ship. But the day is saved. Hey, much quicker than usual. After the crew is beamed up, though, there's a warning alarm for a breach, and Hannah says it may be too much. They're going to have to evacuate. But Geordi, he's not fooled. He knows when a woman is faking under these circumstances. So, in private, he asks her why. So she admits the truth. She stopped believing in this place. Their technology is far behind that of the rest of the human race, a natural consequence of a small, isolated population with nothing more than pure research as a motivator rather than need. You sometimes need something more. Speaking personally, of the 5 projects that I've ever done that I'm the most proud of, 3 of them were birthed working on something else for someone else. The role necessity and inspiration and fresh ideas play in advancement is nothing less than essential. Without them, it's like having a garage with all of the best tools and only a few spare parts lying around. You need to have something more if you want to build a hot rod. Hannah asks the Enterprise for asylum, and Riker says that some of the other people might be having the same idea. Troy thinks it's a horrible idea. It would damage the colony's society if those people left.
But we saved them from destruction.
Did we?
Well, they're not dead. Or do you, Captain quote Shakespeare at it, suddenly think that humans are incapable of adaptation in the face of adversity? I admit there's one aspect of the episode that, in retrospect, I wish I would have done differently. Sometimes when I do a preliminary watch on a work, I'll break the viewing down into bite-sized bits while I'm also doing something else. 5 minutes of watching and then do a task. It's not to break up the episode so much as to break up the tasks. I need to get the episode watched. I need to do a lot of other things. Shuffling them all together allows me to get through both at the same time. So I did watch all of this in one sitting, but I watched it over the course of about 2.5 hours. Now I mention this because there is one thing that I did not notice that has been a frequent complaint about the episode, which is that it's boring. Now I didn't find it boring, but in retrospect I realize I only watched it in bursts of about 5 minutes at a time. And watching it again to work on this review, well, obviously I didn't find it boring, but I was also taking breaks even more frequently because I had to keep writing my thoughts down. And obviously watching this thing again now for the third time in as many days, well, even if it was pretty damn interesting, it would be boring regardless. So I can't really go back and gauge it that way. So that's why when I think about this episode, I'd have to give it a score of 4 out of 10. It's not quite up to the TNG average, but I don't find it as dull as other people seem to. But it could have been the consequence of the way which I watched it. Just felt that caveat needed to be in there. Anyway, Picard is going to talk to Connor about the situation, and Troy's coming along. But she confesses the relationship, about it being a mistake. Some feel that this whole thing is a double standard, that Riker wouldn't apologize in such a situation, although if Riker apologized every time he fucked an alien that he wasn't supposed to, nothing would ever get done around here. In any case, it seems more likely it's the fact that Connor is the leader of these people, and under these circumstances, a relationship could potentially compromise his judgment when the entire future of his society is at stake, making him more inclined to trust Troy and the Enterprise crew, and more willing to entertain ideas that he normally wouldn't. With the colony, I mean. What he and Troy did in private, I really do not want to know. That can be a secret kept between the two of them and Rule 34. Ron Canada is irate at Hannah over this, but Picard and Connor talk in private about the situation. Connor wants Picard to just leave, but Picard cannot allow these people to be kept as prisoners against their will. They are human beings.
Nor can you ignore the fact that thousands will suffer if you agree to take them. And as suffering grows, more will demand to leave. We are witnessing the end of this existence.
Perhaps. But if these people don't like that existence, what justice is there making them remain in it? They're not Borg drones whose purpose is to serve the hive. They're people who should be allowed self-determination. Although that's hard to grasp in a society where everyone was programmed to want to fulfill your role. You can no longer comprehend the idea that someone might realize they want to choose their own path, not have it chosen for them. But here's the unpleasant truth. Your society was doomed. It faced a threat that it could not survive. And that happens. Human history sees societies rise and fall throughout its eras. We adapt and we build something new and stronger, hopefully with the lesson of hindsight. Your ancestors built something with good intentions, but it was a failed experiment that left you stagnant and vulnerable. And you were fortunate that someone came along to at the very least save your people, even if your society was so ill-conceived that it couldn't last. Besides, if your ancestors could build something so grand, and you are 8 generations of improvements upon them, then surely you can build something even better, right? And that's the note I'd like to end on. Except I can't.
If ever we needed reminding of the importance of the Prime Directive, it is now.
Oh, shit on a biscuit. Please don't.
We had to respond to the threat of the core fragment, didn't we? Of course we did. But in the end, we may have proved just as dangerous to that colony as any core fragment could ever have been.
Prime Directive. Proof there is no such thing as a good idea somebody can't figure out a way to screw up. It has been corrupted from an enlightened philosophy into an amoral religion. The irony of Picard's pronouncement about dogma. Huh? The Prime Directive's philosophy is to avoid colonialism, exploitation, white man's burden bullshit. It's not to watch people die while sucking a cup of tea. Every time someone uses a comparison of Spanish conquistadors or the American takeover of the Philippines, every time we offer a helping hand to someone who would otherwise die out, I'd like to tie them to a chair and make them watch 16 straight hours of footage of the helpless and the starving and the dying, so they understand that there is a difference between I am going to help you and then exploit you, and I was just passing by and thought I might lend a hand. If you suggested that a person who wanted to save children from a burning school bus was a pedophile or a child trafficker, people would think you were a lunatic, and rightly so. But save 1,000 children, and suddenly some people think you are fucking Cortez. Kirk, with Spock's approval no less, because it was logical, would not behave in such a way. Unless you say that it was part of their era, Ben Sisko invoked the Prime Directive exactly once. And even in that singular case, he was prepared to offer asylum if it was asked for. But only if, not to impose help, but to extend help to those who wanted it. That is the spirit of the Prime Directive. Oh no, things are going to change, possibly forever. Yeah, that was going to happen no matter what. Change via a side effect of requested aid, or change as a consequence of destruction. How fucking dare anyone suggest those two things are the same? This society was not built to survive catastrophe, so of course it died when catastrophe finally arrived. We're talking about a society that is so fragile, it can't survive being saved. So the society fell. But the people lived. And to suggest that losing the culture is just as bad as losing the people is the view of those who have full bellies and expected safety. Keeping a culture alive is an ideal. Keeping people alive is a moral responsibility. If you're bothered that you might sometimes, in the course of saving people from a natural disaster or providing humanitarian aid, contaminate their culture by your presence, well, that is the burden of claiming you are a moral person, that there may be unexpected consequences. But to be so fearful of consequence that you are frozen in inaction is repulsive, and hiding behind a philosophical interpretation that is built solely to soothe your conscience is the act of a coward. The purpose of the Prime Directive is to prevent exploitation and of imposing our values upon others, but to allow wholesale annihilation under the misguided belief that it's better to die a preventable death than to be contaminated or changed is not looking for their best interests. It allows you to play it safe. You should all go home and send out probes to explore the galaxy, because you're going to leave footprints out here in the dust, on the fallen leaves, and on the people that you encounter. And if the thought of that tightens your gut, you got no business leaving your atmosphere. Leave it to those who have the moral fiber to accept that sometimes there will be an imperfect solution, but better imperfection than a dogmatic belief propped up on the skulls of the innocent. The Prime Directive is a good idea being used for bad ends the moment we think it is anything more than a philosophy, a guide, and instead turned into a religion on which we sacrifice others so we don't have to make decisions and own the consequences. Indeed, that is the very irony of this warped application of the Prime Directive, a philosophy that we will not impose our values upon others means we're willing to let others die for the sake of our values. All hail the Overlord! All hail the Overlord!